They got millions at my daughter's funeral while I got one plane ticket. 3 weeks later, they were begging from prison cells, and I held the key to everything. My name is Cedric Doyle, and I'm about to tell you how my daughter's final gift exposed a family of killers and changed my life forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Have you ever received a message from someone after they died? Because what I found in my daughter's room that rainy Portland evening would turn everything I thought I knew upside down. The Sterling family had turned Evangeline's funeral into their personal theater of grief. While I stood there in my $15 thrift store suit, genuinely shattered by losing the only person who truly understood me, they performed like seasoned actors. Thaddeus Sterling. My daughter's husband wore what I'm sure was a $5,000 black suit, dabbing his eyes with a silk handkerchief while checking his Rolex twice during the eulogy. His parents, Bartholomew and Cordelia Sterling, flanked him like well-dressed vultures. Bartholomew kept adjusting his gold cufflinks, treating the service like a board meeting he was eager to conclude. Cordelia dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than my monthly teacher's salary, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the chapel light with every calculated movement. Then there was Seraphina Thaddeus's sister, who somehow made even funeral attire look like a fashion statement. She wore designer sunglasses indoors and kept glancing at her phone, probably managing her social media empire even during her sister-in-law's memorial service. The contrast was stark and painful. Here I was, a 58-year-old high school history teacher who'd driven 3 hours from my modest southeast Portland home in a 12-year-old Toyota Camry that desperately needed new brake pads. I'd raised Evangeline by myself after my wife died when our daughter was only 6 years old. We didn't have money for private schools or country club memberships, but we had Sunday morning pancakes and chess games that lasted until midnight. The Sterlings had always made it clear I didn't belong in their world of West Hills mansions and charity galas. At Evangeline's wedding, Bartholomew had introduced me to his friends as the teacher, with the same tone someone might use to say the janitor. Cordelia once asked me if I'd ever considered a more lucrative career path for Evangeline's sake, as if my love for my daughter could be measured in dollar signs. After the service, the will reading at Morrison and Associates felt like a carefully orchestrated humiliation. The Sterlings received millions. Thaddeus got the medical company and patents worth $8 million. His parents inherited the Scottsdale house and investment portfolio worth $4.8 million, and Seraphina received the jewelry collection and BMW worth over $1 million. When the attorney handed me a simple white envelope, the silence was deafening. Then the laughter erupted. A vacation! Thaddeus slapped the mahogany conference table. The broke teacher gets a pity trip to Europe. Inside was a single airplane ticket, Portland to Denver to Montana, and a small piece of paper with Evangeline's handwriting. Papa, trust me one last time. The truth waits where eagles soar. Montana, I whispered, confused. Evangeline had never mentioned Montana. We'd talked about visiting Italy someday, maybe Switzerland, but never Montana. Maybe she left you camping money too, Seraphina added with mock sympathy, leaning over to examine the ticket. The family erupted in fresh laughter, making jokes about postcards and souvenirs, while I sat there clutching that envelope like a lifeline. But something felt different about this. Evangeline had never asked me to trust her without good reason. Walking to my Camry while the Sterlings climbed into their luxury vehicles, I made a decision that would change everything. That evening I sat in my small kitchen staring at the plane ticket. My bank account showed $1,247. Rent was due in 5 days, my car needed those brake pads, and I had 42 essays to grade by Monday. Every logical part of my brain screamed that flying to Montana was financial suicide. But I couldn't stop thinking about Evangeline's last visit 3 weeks ago. She'd seemed different somehow, softer, like she'd stopped playing a role she'd been forced into. Papa, she'd said, while Thaddeus waited outside, do you remember what you taught me about the smallest gifts when I was 7? I'd smiled, remembering her painted rock for Father's Day. Sometimes the smallest gifts carry the biggest meaning. Exactly. She'd hugged me longer than usual. Promise me you'll remember that. Sometimes things that look insignificant are actually the most precious. Now holding that ticket, her words felt prophetic. I was cleaning out her old bedroom when I noticed something odd about our favorite photograph. The one of us playing chess when she was 12. The frame seemed slightly loose. When I removed the backing, a small USB drive fell into my palm. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop. The screen filled with Evangeline's face, and for a moment I forgot she was gone. She looked tired but peaceful, sitting in what appeared to be a rustic cabin, with golden light streaming behind her. Papa, she said softly. If you're hearing this, then I'm already dead, and they think they've won. 48 hours later, I stood in the departure hall at Portland International Airport, clutching that plane ticket like a lifeline. My decision to trust Evangeline's final message had cost me almost everything I had left. I'd called in emergency leave at Lincoln High, arranged for a neighbor to check on my house, and withdrawn $800 from my meager savings account. The early morning rush swirled around me as I approached the Alaska Airlines check-in counter, my hands trembling slightly as I handed over my identification and the ticket Evangeline had left me. The agent, a cheerful woman in her 30s, scanned the barcode, and her eyebrows raised in surprise. "Oh, Mr. Doyle, it looks like you've been upgraded to first class," she said with a warm smile. "Someone prearranged this for you months ago. Lucky you." My heart skipped a beat. Months ago, that meant Evangeline had been planning this long before she died. The Sterling family had laughed at my coach class middle seat, but here I was holding a first-class boarding pass that my daughter had somehow arranged from beyond the grave. "There must be some mistake," I stammered, staring at the upgraded ticket. "I'm just a high school teacher. I don't fly first class." "No mistake, sir. Everything's been taken care of. Your flight boards at gate B12 in 30 minutes. Have a wonderful trip to Denver." "Denver?" I stopped short. "I thought this was going to Italy. The ticket says Montana." She checked her screen again. "You're correct. Portland to Denver, then a connection to Missoula, Montana. No Italy on this itinerary, sir." My mind raced as I walked toward security. Italy had been the Sterling family's assumption, their cruel joke about my European adventure. But Evangeline had never mentioned Italy in her note. She'd written about truth waiting where eagles soar, and Montana was certainly eagle country. The security line moved slowly, giving me too much time to second-guess this insane decision. What was I doing flying across the country, on the word of a cryptic message from my dead daughter? But every time doubt crept in, I heard her voice from that USB. "Papa, if you're hearing this, then I'm already dead, and they think they've won." Who were they? The Sterlings. And what exactly did they think they'd won at gate B12? I settled into a plastic chair and watched the morning travelers rush past. Business executives in expensive suits, families heading on vacation, college students with oversized backpacks. I felt completely out of place in my worn khakis and flannel shirt, carrying a single duffel bag that had seen better decades. "Now boarding first-class passengers for Flight 2847 to Denver," the gate agent announced. I approached the boarding bridge, still half convinced this was all an elaborate mistake. But my upgraded boarding pass scanned perfectly, and the flight attendant welcomed me aboard with professional courtesy. She directed me to seat 3A, a wide leather seat that probably cost more than I made in a week of teaching. As I settled in, trying not to look as overwhelmed as I felt, the same flight attendant approached with a sealed envelope in her hand. "Mr. Doyle, this was left for you with a passenger manifest note. I was instructed to give it to you once we were airborne." My hands shook as I accepted the envelope. It was cream-colored paper, expensive-looking, with my name written in Evangeline's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a single sentence: "The man with the sign knows the way home." I stared out the window as Portland grew smaller beneath us, the Columbia River winding like a silver ribbon through the green landscape I'd called home for 30 years. Somewhere down there, the Sterling family was probably celebrating their newfound wealth, completely unaware that their victim's father was flying toward some unknown truth. The flight to Denver passed in a blur of complimentary coffee and anxious thoughts. Every time I tried to make sense of what was happening, I came back to the same conclusion. Evangeline had orchestrated something elaborate, something that required months of planning and careful preparation. When we touched down at Denver International Airport, I followed the crowd toward baggage claim, my single duffel bag making the journey unnecessary. The arrivals area was chaos. Travelers reuniting with family drivers holding signs for corporate pickups, tourists looking lost and overwhelmed. That's when I saw him. A man in his mid-40s stood near the exit doors holding a professionally printed sign that read, "ED Guest." He was tall and well-built, with kind eyes and an easy smile that immediately put me at ease despite my confusion. His clothes were casual but expensive: dark jeans, leather jacket, boots that had seen some use but were well maintained. I approached him cautiously, my heart hammering against my ribs. "I'm Cedric Doyle," I said hesitantly. His face lit up with relief and something that looked almost like recognition. "Mr. Doyle." Finally. His voice carried a slight accent I couldn't quite place. Maybe Italian-American, maybe just East Coast. "My name is Lorenzo. Please come with me quickly." He took my duffel bag before I could protest and began walking toward the exit with purposeful strides. "Wait," I said, hurrying to keep up. How did you know I was coming? What's this all about? Lorenzo paused and turned to face me, his expression growing serious. Your daughter arranged everything, Mr. Doyle. She said you'd need family when the time came, and that time is now. Family, I don't understand any of this. You will, he said gently, resuming his walk toward the parking garage. Evangeline told me you were a good man who deserved the truth. She also said you taught her that real family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. Those words hit me like a physical blow. I had taught her that years ago when she was struggling with feeling different from the wealthy families at her private school. Where are we going? I managed to ask. Lorenzo stopped beside a black SUV and opened the passenger door for me. Home, Mr. Doyle. We're going home. Lorenzo led me through Denver International's maze of corridors toward a section I'd never seen before, private aviation services. My confusion deepened as we bypassed the main terminals and headed toward a smaller building marked Executive Aviation. Mr. Doyle, Lorenzo said as we walked, I know this is overwhelming, but your daughter was very specific about how this needed to happen. She said you taught her that some journeys require faith, even when you can't see the destination. Those words stopped me cold. I had said that to Evangeline during her first year of medical school, when she was struggling with the workload and questioning whether she was smart enough to become a doctor. How could you possibly know that? I asked. Lorenzo's expression grew tender. Because she talked about you constantly. She said her papa was the strongest man she knew. Not because he never fell down, but because he always got back up. She said you taught her that real family protects each other no matter what. We approached a sleek Cessna Citation where a pilot was completing his pre-flight check. The luxury of it all made my head spin. First-class commercial flights, private jets, mysterious drivers who seemed to know my daughter's deepest thoughts about family and strength. Where exactly are we going? I asked as Lorenzo helped me up the aircraft steps. Somewhere safe, he replied. Somewhere Evangeline chose specifically because she knew you'd find peace there while we sort through everything. The flight to Montana took 90 minutes, during which Lorenzo gradually began sharing more about his connection to my daughter. He spoke carefully, choosing his words like a man walking through a minefield. But I could sense genuine affection and respect in his voice whenever he mentioned Evangeline. She came to me about 2 years ago, he said as we flew over the Rocky Mountains. She was scared, Mr. Doyle. Really scared. But she was also determined to do the right thing, even if it put her in danger. Danger from whom? I pressed. The people who thought they owned her, Lorenzo replied cryptically. The people who thought money and status gave them the right to hurt others. From the small aircraft window, I watched the landscape transform from Colorado's urban sprawl to Montana's vast wilderness. Endless forests stretched toward distant peaks, broken only by winding rivers that caught the afternoon sunlight like ribbons of silver. It was beautiful and intimidating, the kind of place where a person could disappear completely if they needed to. We landed at a small airstrip that seemed to exist in the middle of nowhere, a single runway carved from the forest with a modest terminal building that looked more like a hunting lodge than an airport. Lorenzo's SUV was waiting in the gravel parking lot, as if he'd arranged every detail of this journey months in advance. The drive through Glacier National Park took us deeper into wilderness than I'd ever experienced. Towering pines pressed close to the narrow road, their branches creating a canopy so thick that driving through it felt like traveling through a green tunnel. We passed pristine lakes that reflected the mountains like mirrors and meadows, where elk grazed peacefully in the distance. Evangeline loved this place, Lorenzo said as we navigated a particularly winding section of road. She said it reminded her of the camping trips you used to take when she was little. Just you and her against the world. My throat tightened. Those camping trips had been some of our happiest times together. Just a teacher and his daughter exploring Oregon's wilderness with a used tent and a cooler full of sandwiches. We couldn't afford fancy vacations, but we could afford adventure. After 45 minutes of driving, Lorenzo turned onto an unmarked dirt road that wound upward through dense forest. Just when I thought we were completely lost, the trees opened into a clearing, and I saw our destination. The compound looked like something from a luxury travel magazine, a sprawling log structure that blended seamlessly with the natural surroundings. Massive windows reflected the forest, and a wraparound porch suggested peaceful evenings watching the sunset over the mountains. Solar panels were discreetly integrated into the roof design, and I noticed what appeared to be a sophisticated security system camouflaged among the rustic details. "Welcome to your daughter's safe house, Mr. Doyle," Lorenzo said as he parked near the main entrance. "Safe house. I repeated, climbing out of the SUV on unsteady legs. Lorenzo walked around the vehicle and faced me directly, his expression growing serious. Mr. Doyle, there's something I need to tell you about who I am and why Evangeline trusted me with her life. He took a deep breath, and I could see him making a decision that would change everything. My name is Lorenzo Benedetti, and I'm a federal agent with the FBI. For the past 2 years, your daughter has been helping us build a case against some very dangerous people. Mr. Doyle, your daughter was helping us catch serial killers. The words hit me like a physical blow. Serial killers, I whispered, gripping the SUV's door handle to steady myself. The Sterlings, Lorenzo confirmed grimly. The people who laughed at you during that were reading the people who thought they'd inherited millions from your daughter's death. They're not just wealthy socialites, Mr. Doyle. They're a family of murderers who have been killing people for decades. I stared at him, my mind reeling. The elegant Cordelia Sterling with her diamond tennis bracelet, Bartholomew with his gold pocket watch and patronizing smile, Serafina with her social media empire and designer funeral attire, Thaddeus with his expensive suits and calculated tears. My God, I breathed. How many people? Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Too many, Mr. Doyle. Far too many. And your daughter died because she was brave enough to help us stop them. The Montana wilderness suddenly felt less peaceful and more like a fortress. I understood now why Evangeline had chosen this remote location, why she'd arranged for Lorenzo to bring me here, why everything had been planned with such meticulous care. My little girl hadn't just been murdered by her husband's family. She'd been murdered because she was a hero. Lorenzo guided me through the compound's main entrance, and I was immediately struck by the contrast between the rustic exterior and what lay inside. While the building maintained its lodge-like appearance with exposed wooden beams and stone fireplaces, I caught glimpses of sophisticated technology, discreetly integrated throughout, security monitors disguised as picture frames, communication equipment hidden behind cabin decor, and computer terminals that looked more advanced than anything I'd seen at Lincoln High School. This way, Mr. Doyle, Lorenzo said, leading me down a hallway, lined with what appeared to be family photographs, but were actually, I realized, surveillance images and case documentation cleverly disguised as personal memorabilia. We stopped at a heavy wooden door that looked like it belonged to a hunting lodge library. Lorenzo placed his hand on what I'd initially mistaken for a decorative brass plate, and I heard the soft click of electronic locks disengaging. Evangeline insisted on recording everything, he said as he opened the door. She said you'd need to hear it from her in her own words, or you'd never believe what we're asking you to do. The room beyond took my breath away. What appeared from the hallway to be a cozy study was actually a high-tech briefing center. Multiple large screens lined the walls, and sophisticated camera equipment was positioned around a comfortable leather chair that faced the largest display. The technology was seamlessly integrated with rustic design elements. Computer servers hidden inside log cabin-style cabinetry, and fiber optic cables disguised as decorative rope lighting. Please sit down, Lorenzo said, gesturing toward the leather chair. She's been waiting for you. Before I could ask what he meant, the main screen flickered to life, and my heart stopped. Evangeline appeared before me, so lifelike and present that for a moment I forgot she was gone. She sat in what looked like the same room, wearing a simple blue sweater I remembered from her last visit to Portland. Her hair was pulled back in the ponytail she'd favored since childhood, and her eyes held the same mixture of determination and gentleness that had defined her since she was old enough to walk. Hi, Papa, she said, and her voice filled the room with warmth I hadn't felt since her funeral. If you're seeing this, then you trusted me enough to take that plane ticket, and Lorenzo was able to bring you safely home. Tears streamed down my face as I reached toward the screen, my hand encountering only air where my daughter's face appeared to be. I know this is overwhelming, she continued, as if she could see my reaction. I know you're scared and confused and probably wondering if you've lost your mind. But you haven't, Papa. You've just discovered what I've been working on for the past 2 years. The screen shifted to display photographs, documents, and what appeared to be surveillance footage. I saw images of the Sterling family at various social events, but now they looked different. Predatory, calculating, dangerous, in ways I'd never noticed during our awkward family gatherings. The people who laughed at you during my will, reading the people who thought they'd inherited millions from my death, they're not just wealthy socialites, Papa. They're serial killers. For over 30 years, the Sterling family has been murdering people for money, for fun, for practice. They've killed 47 people that we know of, and probably more we haven't discovered yet. The number hit me like a physical blow. 47 people, I whispered. My God, Evangeline. She continued as if she'd heard me. I discovered what they were doing 2 years ago purely by accident. I was reviewing some of Thaddeus's business files when I found insurance policies on people I'd never heard of. Policies that had paid out after suspicious deaths. When I started investigating, I realized I'd married into a family of monsters. The screen showed financial documents, insurance claims, and what appeared to be police reports. The scope of the Sterling family's crimes was staggering. Deaths spanning decades. Victims from multiple states. A systematic pattern of murder disguised as accidents, suicides, and natural causes. I went to the FBI Papa because I knew I couldn't handle this alone. That's how I met Lorenzo. He's been working organized crime cases for 20 years, and he helped me understand that the Sterlings weren't just opportunistic killers. They were a criminal enterprise that had been operating under everyone's noses for decades. I looked at Lorenzo, who stood quietly in the corner, watching my reaction with professional concern and personal compassion. For 2 years, I've been gathering evidence wearing recording devices, documenting their conversations, building a case that would finally bring them to justice. But they started getting suspicious, Papa. They began to realize that someone was investigating them, and they figured out it was me. Evangeline's expression grew more serious, and I could see the fear she'd been hiding during our last phone conversations. I knew they were going to kill me. I could see it in their eyes during family dinners, hear it in the way they talked about problems that needed to be solved. So I made these recordings set up this safe house, and arranged for Lorenzo to bring you here if something happened to me. The screen shifted again, and now Evangeline was looking directly at me with an expression I recognized from her childhood. The look she got when she was about to ask me to trust her with something important. Papa, there's something else you need to know. Something about yourself that I discovered when I started working with the FBI. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I know who you really are. I know about your 15 years in Army intelligence. I know about the classified missions, the tactical training, the psychological operations experience you never talked about. My blood ran cold. I'd never told Evangeline about my military service beyond the basic fact that I'd served before becoming a teacher. The classified nature of my intelligence work meant I couldn't discuss it with anyone, including my own daughter. You taught me to fight for what's right, even when it's dangerous, she continued. You taught me that some battles are worth risking everything for. Now I need you to fight one more battle, Papa. I need you to help Lorenzo finish what we started. The screen went dark, leaving me sitting in stunned silence, staring at my own reflection in the black monitor. Lorenzo stepped forward. She knew you'd need time to process this, Mr. Doyle. But she also knew that once you understood the stakes, you'd make the right choice. I looked up at him, my mind reeling with revelations about serial killers, FBI operations, and a military past I'd thought was buried forever. What exactly are you asking me to do? Lorenzo led me from the briefing room down another hallway to what appeared to be his personal office. Unlike the high-tech briefing center, this space felt more lived in, a working office with case files, photographs, and the comfortable clutter of someone who spent long hours pursuing dangerous criminals. He gestured for me to sit in a leather chair across from his desk, then opened a thick manila folder that had been waiting there. Before we discuss what comes next, Mr. Doyle, you need to understand exactly who you are, and why Evangeline knew you were the only person who could help us finish this. He spread several documents across the desk, and I found myself staring at my own military service, record-classified files I hadn't seen in over 30 years. My hands trembled as I recognized forms, evaluations, and mission reports from a life I'd deliberately left behind. Staff Sergeant Cedric Doyle, United States Army Intelligence and Security Command. 15 years of active duty specialized in psychological operations and criminal investigation. 3 tours overseas, multiple commendations for work I still can't discuss publicly. Lorenzo's voice carried deep respect. You weren't just a soldier, Mr. Doyle. You were one of the military's best investigators. That was a long time ago, I said quietly, though seeing those documents brought back memories of skills I thought were buried forever. I became a teacher because I wanted a peaceful life. I wanted to help kids learn history, not make it. Your daughter understood that, Lorenzo replied. But she also knew that when faced with evil, this profound, you'd remember who you really are underneath the classroom persona. A large monitor on his wall flickered to life, revealing 3 FBI agents in what appeared to be a secure conference room. Lorenzo activated the connection, and suddenly I was face to face with the federal task force that had been hunting the Sterling family. Mr. Doyle, said a woman who introduced herself as Special Agent Sarah Chen, we've been waiting 2 years for this conversation. Your daughter spoke of you constantly. not just as her beloved father, but as the only person with the skills and access we need to complete this investigation. Access? I asked, confused. The Sterling family has become extremely suspicious of law enforcement, explained Agent Chen. They've detected our surveillance multiple times, they've hired counterintelligence specialists, and they've essentially made it impossible for federal agents to get close to them. But you're Evangeline's father. You're the grieving teacher they mocked at the funeral. To them, you're completely harmless. The third agent, a man named Rodriguez, leaned forward. Mr. Doyle, we need someone who can get inside their circle, someone they'll never suspect of working with us. Your military background gives you the tactical skills, and your relationship to Evangeline gives you the access. What exactly are you asking me to do? I repeated my earlier question. Lorenzo answered this time. We need you to play the part of the broken, desperate father-in-law who's struggling financially after losing his daughter. We need you to approach them for help, maybe ask for a loan or a job. Once you're in their inner circle, we need you to wear recording devices and gather evidence. The scope of what they were asking hit me like a physical blow. They wanted me to go undercover against a family of serial killers, to put myself in deliberate danger, to help catch murderers who had already killed 47 people. There's something else you need to know, Agent Chen said, her expression growing grave. Something personal that will help you understand just how evil these people really are. She consulted her notes, and I could see her steeling herself to deliver devastating news. Mr. Doyle, your wife didn't die of cancer 28 years ago. She was murdered. The words hit me like lightning. What did you say? Cordelia Sterling poisoned your wife with a slow-acting toxin that mimicked the symptoms of aggressive cancer. It was a test run. She wanted to perfect her methods before using them on higher-value targets. The room spun around me. My beautiful Sarah, who had fought so bravely against what we thought was a terminal illness, who had spent her final months worried about leaving Evangeline and me alone. She had been murdered by the woman who would later become my daughter's mother-in-law. They killed my wife to practice. The words came out as a roar, and I realized I was standing, my hands clenched into fists. These people are monsters. Yes, they are, Lorenzo said quietly. And for 28 years they've gotten away with it because no one suspected that wealthy socialites could be systematic killers. I stared at the photographs of my military service, remembering the oath I'd taken to protect innocent people from exactly this kind of evil. I thought about Sarah dying slowly while Cordelia Sterling perfected her murder techniques. I thought about Evangeline bravely gathering evidence while knowing her own life was in danger. I thought about 47 other families who had lost loved ones to Sterling family greed and cruelty. Your daughter knew you'd never abandon a mission once you understood the stakes, Lorenzo said. She knew that underneath the gentle teacher there was still a soldier who understood the difference between right and wrong. I looked around the room at the FBI agents who had been fighting this battle for 2 years at Lorenzo, who had risked his own life to infiltrate the Sterling circle at the evidence files that represented decades of unpunished murder. The decision wasn't difficult. It was the easiest choice I'd made in 30 years. For Evangeline, I said, my voice steady with newfound determination. For my wife, Sarah. For all 47 victims whose families deserve justice. I looked directly into the video camera connecting me to the FBI team. I'll do whatever you need me to do. Agent Chen smiled for the first time since our conversation began. Welcome to the task force, Mr. Doyle. Let's bring these killers down. Lorenzo closed my military file and opened a new folder, marked Operation Sterling Takedown. Now, he said, let me show you exactly how we're going to destroy them. 1 week later, I stood in the FBI field office in downtown Portland, watching multiple screens that showed live feeds from surveillance teams positioned around Sterling family properties. After 7 days of intensive preparation, learning to use recording devices, studying Sterling family routines, and reviewing decades of case files, the moment of justice had finally arrived. All teams, this is command. Agent Chen's voice crackled through the communication system. Operation Sterling Takedown is a go. Execute, execute, execute. At exactly 6 a.m, coordinated FBI raids began simultaneously across Portland. I watched in fascination as tactical teams moved with military precision against targets I'd once sat across from at awkward family dinners. The West Hills mansion where Cordelia Sterling had hosted charity galas while planning murders. The downtown medical building where Thaddeus had run his legitimate business as cover for systematic killing. Serafina's trendy Pearl District apartment where she'd built her social media empire while helping dispose of bodies. Breach, 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 came the reports from team leaders as they entered Sterling properties with battering rams and search warrants. Lorenzo stood beside me, his face grim with satisfaction, as we watched 2 years of careful investigation finally bear fruit. 47 families finally get justice today, he said quietly. The first breakthrough came at 7:30, when the team at the Sterling mansion reported that Cordelia had been taken into custody without resistance. Within minutes, she was in an FBI interview room, and I watched through a one-way mirror as the woman who had murdered my wife 28 years ago finally faced the consequences of her actions. "I want to make a deal," were the first words out of Cordelia's mouth. No denials, no protests of innocence, no demands for a lawyer. Just immediate capitulation from a woman who knew her decades of killing had finally caught up with her. "I'll tell you everything," she continued, her voice steady despite the handcuffs. "Every victim, every method, every location where we disposed of bodies. But I want the death penalty off the table." Agent Rodriguez, leading the interrogation, leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Sterling, you haven't even been formally charged yet, and you're already confessing—" "I'm 72 years old," Cordelia replied with chilling pragmatism. "I'd rather spend my remaining years in federal prison than face execution. Besides, you already have enough evidence to convict me 10 times over. That teacher's daughter was very thorough." Hearing her refer to Evangeline so dismissively made my blood boil, but I forced myself to remain silent and observe. The second major development came at 9 o'clock, when the team at Serafina's apartment reported an unusual situation. Instead of finding a defiant socialite, they discovered her in the middle of what appeared to be a complete psychological breakdown. "She's not responding to commands," the team leader reported. "She's sitting in the corner of her bedroom, rocking back and forth, repeating something about being 7 years old." An FBI psychologist was immediately dispatched to the scene, and within an hour we had a clearer picture of Serafina Sterling's role in the family's crimes. Rather than being a willing participant, she appeared to be another victim, a child who had been systematically abused and manipulated into participating in murders she was too young to understand. "I was 7 when Cordelia first made me watch," Serafina whispered to the psychologist, her voice barely audible through the recording equipment. "She said it was a family tradition. She said all the Sterling women had to learn how to protect the family's interests." The revelation that Serafina had been forced to witness murders as a small child added another layer of horror to the Sterling family's crimes. This wasn't just a case of adult criminals choosing evil. It was generational abuse that had created new victims, even within the family itself. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place at 11 o'clock when Thaddeus Sterling was brought in for questioning. Unlike his mother's immediate confession or his sister's psychological collapse, Thaddeus initially attempted to maintain his innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about," he insisted when Agent Chen began asking about the family's systematic murders. "I'm a legitimate businessman. I run a medical device company." But when agents presented him with recordings Evangeline had made, conversations where he discussed cleaning up problems and making people disappear, his facade crumbled completely. "You have to understand," he said, his voice breaking. "I never wanted to be part of this. But Cordelia, she made it clear that family members who didn't participate would become victims themselves." Over the next 2 hours, Thaddeus provided detailed testimony about the Sterling family's criminal enterprise. He revealed the locations of bodies that had never been found, explained the methods they used to select victims, and described a systematic approach to murder that spanned over 3 decades. "We targeted people who wouldn't be missed immediately," he explained, his voice flat, with exhaustion and shame. "Elderly individuals with no close family, homeless people, immigrants without documentation. Cordelia called them practice runs for the more lucrative killings." By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the Sterling family empire had been completely dismantled. Cordelia was facing life in prison without possibility of parole. Serafina was being transferred to a secure psychiatric facility for evaluation and treatment. Thaddeus was cooperating fully with investigators in hopes of receiving a reduced sentence. Their assets, the West Hills mansion, the medical company investment portfolios worth millions, were all seized under federal RICO statutes. Bank accounts were frozen, luxury vehicles were impounded, and even Serafina's jewelry collection was cataloged as evidence. "It's over," Lorenzo said as we watched the final reports come in from field teams. "After 30 years of killing, the Sterling family is finished." I stared at the monitors showing empty Sterling properties, their owners now in federal custody, and felt a satisfaction deeper than anything I'd experienced since Evangeline's death. Justice hadn't brought my daughter back, but it had ensured that no other families would suffer what mine had endured. What happens now? I asked. What happens to the victims' families who have been waiting decades for answers? Lorenzo smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from him since we met. Now, Mr. Doyle, we give them something they never thought they'd have. We give them closure, and we give them justice. 2 weeks after the Sterling arrests, I found myself walking into the Portland Convention Center for a gathering I never could have imagined attending. The FBI had organized a meeting for families of Sterling victims, 47 families who had spent years, sometimes decades, wondering what had happened to their loved ones. Lorenzo had asked me to attend as both a victim's family member and as someone who had helped bring the Sterlings to justice. These people need to see that justice is possible, he'd explained. They need to meet the father who helped make it happen. As I entered the main conference hall at 10 o'clock that morning, I was struck by the diversity of the gathering. Elderly couples who had lost adult children, middle-aged adults who had lost parents, even some younger people who had lost siblings. What united them wasn't age or background. It was the shared experience of sudden, unexplained loss followed by years of unanswered questions. Mr. Doyle. A woman in her 60s approached me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm Margaret Chen, no relation to Agent Chen. I lost my husband 15 years ago. The police said it was a heart attack, but I always knew something was wrong. He was the healthiest man I'd ever known. Over the next hour, I met dozens of family members with similar stories. A son whose mother had supposedly died in a car accident that never made sense. A daughter whose father had allegedly committed suicide despite having no history of depression. A brother whose sister had supposedly died of food poisoning at a restaurant that had never had health violations. At 11 o'clock, Agent Chen took the podium and began presenting the complete timeline of Sterling family crimes. Using a massive screen and detailed charts, she walked us through 30 years of systematic murder, showing how the Sterlings had evolved from opportunistic killers to a sophisticated criminal enterprise. The Sterling family targeted victims who fit specific profiles, Agent Chen explained. Individuals who were socially isolated, financially vulnerable, or whose deaths would result in insurance payouts or inheritance opportunities. They perfected methods that mimicked natural causes, accidents, and suicides. The scope of their crimes was staggering. The timeline showed clusters of deaths around major Sterling family expenses. Thaddeus's medical school tuition, Serafina's trust fund establishment, the purchase of their West Hills mansion. Each time the family needed money, people died. Your loved ones weren't random victims, Agent Chen continued. They were specifically chosen and systematically murdered by people who viewed human life as nothing more than a business opportunity. During the lunch break, families began sharing their stories with each other, and I found myself listening to accounts that broke my heart. A woman named Patricia told me about her son, a young veteran who had supposedly died of a drug overdose despite never using drugs. A man named Robert described losing his wife to what doctors had called a rare allergic reaction, even though she'd never had allergies before. The worst part wasn't losing them, Patricia said, wiping away tears. The worst part was everyone telling us to move on, to accept that these things happen, when we knew in our hearts that something was wrong. As the afternoon session began, something remarkable started happening. Instead of just sharing grief, families began talking about healing, about moving forward, about turning their pain into something positive. We can't bring our loved ones back, said David Martinez, whose sister had been killed by the Sterlings 12 years earlier. But we can make sure their deaths weren't meaningless. We can help other families who are going through what we went through. That's when Lorenzo stood up and made an announcement that changed everything. The Sterling family's seized assets total approximately $4.2 million, he said. Federal law allows these assets to be used for victim compensation and support services. The FBI is proposing the establishment of a victim advocacy center funded by Sterling money and dedicated to helping families navigate similar crimes. The room erupted in conversation. Families who had felt powerless for years suddenly saw an opportunity to transform their suffering into something meaningful. We're not just victims anymore, called out Sarah Williams, whose father had been murdered by Cordelia Sterling 18 years ago. We're survivors building something better? As I listened to the excitement and hope in their voices, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since Evangeline's death, I could see a future that involved more than just grief and anger. I could see purpose. Mr. Doyle, Lorenzo said quietly, approaching me as the meeting wound down, the FBI would like you to consider heading this victim advocacy center. Your background in education, your military experience, and your personal connection to this case make you uniquely qualified. I looked around the room at 47 families who had found each other through tragedy, who were now talking about building something positive from their shared pain. Evangeline would want this, I said more to myself than to Lorenzo. She'd want me to help families heal to make sure no one else goes through what we went through alone. Lorenzo smiled. So that's a yes. I thought about my daughter, who had risked everything to bring killers to justice. I thought about my wife, Sarah, whose murder had gone undetected for 28 years. I thought about 47 other victims whose families deserved better than unanswered questions and unresolved grief. That's a yes, I said. Let's build something beautiful from all this pain. 6 months after the Sterling arrests, I stood outside the federal courthouse in downtown Portland, watching as the final chapter of a 30-year reign of terror came to its conclusion. The media had gathered in force for what they were calling the trial of the decade, the sentencing of Cordelia Sterling for 47 counts of first-degree murder. At 9 o'clock, sharp Judge Patricia Morrison delivered the sentence that 47 families had been waiting to hear. Mrs. Sterling, you are hereby sentenced to life in federal prison, without possibility of parole. You will spend the remainder of your natural life paying for the lives you took. I watched Cordelia's face as the words were spoken, searching for some sign of remorse or recognition of the magnitude of her crimes. Instead, I saw only cold calculation, as if she were still treating this as a business transaction that hadn't gone her way. Your Honor, Cordelia said when given the opportunity to speak, I accept this sentence as the cost of doing business in a world that doesn't understand the necessity of making difficult decisions. Even in defeat, she couldn't acknowledge the humanity of her victims. But for the families gathered in that courtroom, her lack of remorse didn't matter. What mattered was that justice had finally been served. The most surprising moment came at 11 o'clock when Serafina Sterling took the witness stand for victim impact statements. After 6 months of intensive psychiatric treatment, she looked like a completely different person from the social media influencer who had collapsed during the FBI raid. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair. Instead, she wore a simple blue dress and spoke with a clarity that comes from confronting painful truths about yourself and your family. Your Honor. Serafina began, her voice steady, despite the obvious difficulty of what she was about to say. I want the court to understand that I was 7 years old when my grandmother first made me watch her kill someone. She told me it was a family tradition that all Sterling women had to learn how to protect the family's interests. The courtroom was completely silent as she continued. For 25 years, I believed that what we were doing was normal, that every family had secrets like ours. It wasn't until I was arrested and began therapy that I understood the full horror of what I had participated in. She turned to face the gallery where victim families sat. I know that my childhood doesn't excuse what I did. I know that being manipulated doesn't erase the pain I helped cause. But I want you to know that I intend to spend the rest of my life trying to undo the damage my family caused. Her testimony revealed the full scope of generational abuse that had created the Sterling criminal enterprise. Cordelia had systematically groomed her granddaughter from childhood, using psychological manipulation and threats to create another killer. But unlike her grandmother, Serafina had chosen redemption over continued violence. I want to spend my life helping undo the damage my family caused, she concluded. I want to work with victim advocacy groups to help other families who have been destroyed by violence to make sure that no other child grows up thinking that murder is normal. The afternoon brought the moment I had been working toward for 6 months, the official opening of the Sterling Victim Advocacy Center. We had transformed the former Sterling Medical Building into a comprehensive support facility for families affected by violent crime. Walking through the renovated space, I felt a profound sense of completion. Where Thaddeus Sterling had once run his legitimate business as cover for systematic murder, we now had counseling offices, legal aid services, and support group meeting rooms. The building that had been part of a criminal empire was now dedicated to healing. At 4 o'clock, I stood before a gathering of victim families, law enforcement officials, and community leaders to officially dedicate the center. Looking out at faces that had been marked by grief but were now filled with hope, I felt Evangeline's presence more strongly than at any time since her death. 6 months ago, we were individual families, struggling alone with loss and unanswered questions, I began. Today, we are a community united in purpose. We have taken the Sterling family's instruments of death and transformed them into tools for healing. I gestured toward the building around us. This center stands as proof that evil does not have the final word in our story. Today, 47 families reclaim their power from those who stole it. The applause was thunderous, but what moved me most were the tears I saw on faces throughout the audience. Not tears of grief, but tears of relief and hope. The Sterling family believed they could reduce human beings to dollar signs on balance sheets. I continued. They thought they could murder with impunity because their victims were isolated and powerless. But they were wrong. We are not isolated anymore, and we are not powerless. I looked directly at the camera crews recording the dedication, knowing that my words would reach other families struggling with similar losses. To every family out there who has lost someone to violence, who has been told to move on without answers, who has felt alone in their search for justice, you are not alone. This center exists for you. We exist for you. As I concluded my remarks, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Lorenzo stood beside me, his face bright with pride and satisfaction. She would be proud, he said quietly, and I knew he was talking about Evangeline. Yes, I replied, looking around at the transformed space filled with people committed to turning tragedy into hope. She would be very proud indeed. The Sterling family had spent 30 years spreading death and destruction. Today we had officially begun the work of spreading healing and hope. It felt like the most important work I had ever done. 1 year after opening the Sterling Victim Advocacy Center, I stood in our main conference room, watching more than 200 people celebrate what had become much more than a victim support facility. It had become a true community. The anniversary celebration was in full swing at 6 o'clock on a warm September evening. Victim families mingled with community volunteers, local law enforcement officers, shared stories with social workers and children who had lost parents, played with elderly grandparents who had lost adult children. The diversity of ages, backgrounds, and experiences created exactly the kind of inclusive family atmosphere that Evangeline would have loved. Mr. Doyle called out Patricia Chen, the woman whose husband had supposedly died of a heart attack 15 years ago. I wanted you to meet my new daughter-in-law, Maria. She lost her brother to violence last year, and we've been supporting each other through the grief process. I watched as Patricia introduced Maria to other families, creating connections that extended far beyond our formal support programs. This was what we had hoped for, not just professional counseling services, but genuine community bonds that would last long after people graduated from our programs. At 6:30, Lorenzo approached the podium to make an announcement that I had been anticipating for months. Friends, he began, his voice carrying the warmth and authority that had made him such an effective FBI agent and an even more effective advocate. After 22 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I am officially retiring to become the full-time co-director of this center, alongside Cedric. The applause was thunderous, but I could see something deeper than appreciation in the faces around the room. Lorenzo had become a father figure to many of the families we served, and his decision to leave federal law enforcement to work with us full-time represented a commitment that went far beyond professional duty. Later, as the formal presentations concluded, Lorenzo found me on the center's back patio, where I was taking a quiet moment to process the evening's emotions. "You taught me that family isn't about blood," I said to him, looking out at the Portland skyline. "It's about who shows up when you need them most. You've shown up for all of us, Lorenzo. You've become the brother I never had." He smiled and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Your daughter knew we'd need each other," he replied. "She planned this too, in her way. She knew that bringing down the Sterlings was only the beginning." At 7 o'clock, we witnessed what might have been the most remarkable moment of the entire evening. Serafina Sterling walked to the front of the room, wearing the simple blue dress that had become her signature since beginning her recovery, and addressed the gathering with a confidence that would have been unimaginable a year ago. 1 year ago, I was a patient in a psychiatric facility, struggling to understand the difference between the family that raised me and the family I wanted to become part of. She began. "Tonight I'm proud to announce that I have completed my therapy program and will be beginning formal training as a victim counselor." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Families who had every reason to hate her instead rose to their feet in support of her transformation. It was a moment that perfectly captured what our center had become, a place where redemption was possible, where people could choose to become better than their worst moments. "Every person we help is a victory over the Sterling legacy." Serafina continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Every family that finds healing here proves that love is more powerful than hate, that community is stronger than isolation, that hope can overcome even the deepest despair." As I watched her speak, I thought about the journey that had brought us all together. A year ago, she had been a broken young woman who had participated in murders because she didn't know any other way to live. Tonight, she was a survivor, helping other survivors, using her own pain to heal others. At 7:45, as the celebration began to wind down, I found myself standing in what had once been Thaddeus Sterling's private office. We had converted it into a memorial room with photographs and brief biographies of all 47 known victims. It was a quiet space where families could come to remember their loved ones and find peace. "Evangeline," I said softly, speaking to her photograph that held a place of honor among the victims. "We didn't just get justice. We built something beautiful from all that pain." I thought about the teacher I had been a year ago, isolated in my grief, overwhelmed by loss, unable to see beyond my own suffering. That man felt like a stranger now. The work we were doing had given my life a purpose I never could have imagined. "You were right about so many things," I continued, touching the frame of her photograph. "You were right that real family isn't about blood. You were right that the smallest gifts can carry the biggest meaning. And you were right that sometimes the people who seem weakest are actually the strongest." Through the window, I could see Lorenzo helping elderly guests to their cars, Serafina cleaning up chairs with the efficiency of someone who had found meaningful work and dozens of families, saying goodbye with the easy affection of people who genuinely cared about each other. This was what Evangeline had died for, not just to stop the Sterling family's killing spree, but to create something positive from the wreckage they had left behind. We had taken their instruments of death and transformed them into tools for healing. We had taken their victims' isolation and replaced it with community. We had taken their legacy of fear and rebuilt it as a foundation of hope. As I turned off the lights in the memorial room and prepared to lock up the center for the evening, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the family I had gained through tragedy. Lorenzo, Serafina, and nearly 50 victim families who had become my chosen brothers and sisters. Tomorrow would bring new families seeking help, new challenges to overcome, and new opportunities to prove that healing was possible. But tonight, I was simply grateful to be surrounded by people who understood that the best response to evil is not revenge, but the patient work of building something better. 2 years after opening the Sterling Victim Advocacy Center, I stood in our memorial garden on a warm September evening, watching the sun cast golden light through the trees we had planted in honor of the 47 known Sterling victims. Today was Evangeline's birthday, and our annual memorial service had become one of the most meaningful traditions in our community's calendar. At 5 o'clock, families began gathering around the simple stone memorial we had erected in the center of the garden. Evangeline's name was engraved at the top, followed by the names of all 47 victims we had been able to identify. Below that, a simple inscription read, "They live on in the love we share and the healing we create." Welcome, everyone. I began addressing the crowd of nearly 100 people who had come to honor not just Evangeline, but all the victims whose deaths had brought us together. 2 years ago, we gathered in grief and anger. Tonight, we gather in memory and hope. I looked out at faces that had become as familiar to me as family. Patricia Chen, who now volunteered as our financial counselor, David Martinez, who had started a support group for siblings of murder victims, Sarah Williams, who had become our community outreach coordinator. These people had transformed from victims into healers, from isolated individuals into a powerful community. "Evangeline would be amazed by what we've built together," I continued. "She sacrificed her life to stop a family of killers, but I think she'd be most proud that we didn't stop there. We chose to build something beautiful from that tragedy." At 5:30, Lorenzo approached the podium carrying a thick folder of letters. Over the past 2 years, this had become his favorite part of our memorial service, reading messages from families whose lives had been touched by our center's work. "These letters represent more than 500 families we've been able to help," Lorenzo announced. "Some are from our local community. Others are from across the country. All of them prove that Evangeline's legacy continues to grow." He opened the first letter. "This is from Maria Santos in Phoenix. When my son was murdered, I thought my life was over. The Sterling Center connected me with other parents who understood my pain. Today I'm training to become a victim advocate myself. Thank you for showing me that healing is possible." Letter after letter told similar stories. Families who had found hope after despair. Individuals who had discovered purpose in their pain communities that had been strengthened by shared healing. Each message was a testament to the ripple effect of choosing love over hate, community over isolation. This last letter, Lorenzo said, his voice growing softer, is from a young woman in Seattle whose sister was murdered by her boyfriend. She writes, "I learned about your center online and called your crisis line at 2 a.m. The volunteer who answered spent 3 hours talking me through the worst night of my life. You saved me. Now I'm volunteering for our local victim services program. The healing spreads." At 6 o'clock, something remarkable happened. Serafina Sterling walked to the front of the gathering and asked everyone to join her in a moment of silence. 2 years ago, this would have been unthinkable. A Sterling family member leading a memorial for their victims. Tonight, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Let us remember not only the victims, Serafina said, her voice clear and strong, but also the perpetrators, who chose violence over love. Let us remember them not to excuse their crimes, but to commit ourselves to breaking the cycles that create such brokenness. The silence that followed was profound. In that quiet moment, I felt the presence of everyone we had lost. Evangeline, my wife Sarah, and all 47 victims whose deaths had brought us together. But I also felt the presence of everyone we had helped, everyone who had found healing through our work, everyone who would find hope in the years to come. As the memorial service concluded at 6:30, I found myself standing alone by Evangeline's memorial stone, watching families embrace and make plans to meet for coffee, to volunteer together, to continue the work of healing that had become our shared mission. "She's still teaching us even now," I said aloud, knowing that Lorenzo was approaching behind me. That love multiplies when you share it, that the best response to evil is to create something good, that real family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. Lorenzo joined me beside the memorial stone. "We're proof that broken people can build beautiful things together," he said quietly. I looked around at the garden we had created at the center that hummed with activity every day, at the community of survivors who had become thrivers. In 2 years, we had helped more than 500 families find their way through grief to healing. We had trained dozens of volunteers, influenced legislation to better protect victims' rights, and inspired similar centers in 3 other states. "Real wealth isn't what you inherit," I said, speaking to Evangeline's memory, but knowing Lorenzo was listening. "It's what you give away. It's the love you share, the healing you create, the hope you plant in ground that once grew only sorrow." As the last families departed and Lorenzo began turning off the garden lights, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not the completion that comes from ending something, but the completion that comes from beginning, something that will outlast you. Tomorrow would bring new families, seeking help, new volunteers ready to serve new opportunities to prove that healing was possible. The Sterling Victim Advocacy Center would continue its work long after Lorenzo and I were gone, staffed by people who understood that the best memorial to the dead is a life dedicated to helping the living. Evangeline's legacy wasn't just that she had stopped a family of killers. Her true legacy was this community of healers, this network of hope, this proof that love really is stronger than death. Looking back now, I've learned that God works in mysterious ways, turning our deepest pain into our greatest purpose. The lesson from this journey isn't about revenge. It's about transformation. Real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or inheritances, but in the lives we touch and the healing we create. These betrayal stories teach us that some wounds cut so deep they change us forever. But like the grandpa stories I now share with young volunteers, the greatest victories come not from destroying our enemies, but from building something beautiful from the wreckage they leave behind. Through God's grace, I discovered that the Sterling family's cruelest betrayal became the foundation for our center's mission. What started as one father's quest for justice became a community of healing that has helped over 500 families find hope again. The betrayal stories we collect at our center remind me daily that evil exists, but so does redemption. These aren't typical grandpa stories with happy endings. They're real accounts of people choosing love over hate service, over self-pity. By God's providence, even the darkest betrayal stories can become testimonies of His power to restore what was broken. Evangeline taught me that sometimes the smallest gifts, like a plane ticket in a crumpled envelope, carry the greatest meaning. Her final gift wasn't money or property, but the opportunity to transform tragedy into triumph, to turn betrayal stories into healing stories. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced betrayal that God transformed into purpose? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell for more powerful stories about love loss and the unexpected ways life reveals who truly matters. Your support helps us reach families who need to know they're not alone in their journey from pain to purpose.